The crystal chandelier in my father's dining room caught the light, refracting into 1,000 pretentious rainbows over the birthday cake. It was the perfect backdrop for Ethan's performance. My brother-in-law raised his glass and bragged, "I'm flipping the family beach house easy profit." I just smiled. He didn't know I'd quietly bought that house years ago. He also didn't know the contractor waiting outside was furious. The room erupted in applause, drowning out the ice clinking in my tumbler. I took a slow sip of scotch, watching him bask in the adoration that belonged to a ghost. "Permits are approved." Ethan lied, his voice smooth of the expensive vintage he hadn't paid for. "Renovations are done. We list in spring for $650,000. My sister Lauren beamed at him, her hand resting possessively on his forearm, looking like she'd just won the lottery. My father clapped a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder, the kind of proud gesture I hadn't felt in decades. They crowded round him, asking about square footage and marble countertops, while I stood in the corner near the patio doors, blending perfectly into the beige wallpaper. The deck restoration was the real beast. Ethan continued, gesturing with his champagne flute like a conductor. Guy wanted $23,000. I talked him down to $18,000. You have to know how to handle these contractors. I almost laughed. The contractor, Mark Rivera, hadn't been talked down to anything. He was standing in the driveway because Ethan had stopped answering his calls 3 weeks ago. Ethan was describing a negotiation that never happened for a house he didn't own. It was a masterpiece of fiction, delivered with terrifying confidence. My phone buzzed against my thigh, a sharp vibration cutting through the room's haze. I slipped it out, shielding the screen from my uncle. It was a text from Mark. "Is that his BMW in the driveway? I see movement inside." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a tall tale to impress the in-laws anymore. This was active fraud colliding with reality. I typed back a quick warning under the table. "Do not come to the door. I will handle this. Meet me tomorrow. It's all about leverage," Ethan was saying now, refilling his glass. "You use the equity to build the next project. That's how real wealth is generated." My father nodded sagely, as if Ethan were quoting scripture. "Smart man," Dad murmured. "Alan, you should take notes." The irony tasted like bile. They didn't know. I was the one who had leveraged the equity 5 years ago to buy the place from Grandma's estate. I had the deed in a fireproof safe, while Ethan held nothing but air and a glass of champagne. I looked at Lauren. She was glowing, radiant with pride, completely unaware that her husband was a criminal. If I spoke now, I would destroy her world in front of everyone. It would be messy, loud, and cruel. That wasn't my way. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, realizing the game had changed. Ethan wasn't just a harmless braggart anymore. He was a threat to my property and my family. I took one last sip of my drink. I wouldn't make a scene tonight, but I would certainly finish it. The coffee shop in Riverside County smelled of burnt roast and industrial cleaner. It was a stark contrast to the champagne fizz of the night before. I found Mark Rivera in a back booth, nursing a black coffee that looked as cold as his stare. He was older than I expected, with weathered hands and the kind of deep, set lines that came from years of squinting at blueprints in the sun. He didn't stand up when I approached. He just tapped a manila envelope on the table. "You said you are family," Mark said, his voice gravelly and low. "So tell me why your brother-in-law is dodging me." I sat down, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. "He isn't just dodging you, Mark. He is lying to everyone." Mark slid the envelope across the laminate table. Inside was a standard renovation contract, but the numbers made my breath hitch. $18,000. Ethan's signature scrawled across the bottom line with a flourish that looked sickeningly confident. It was a binding agreement for a property he had no right to touch. "I need to see the work," I said, pushing the paper aside. Mark pulled out his phone and started scrolling. The images hit me like physical blows. My grandmother's vintage green shutters were ripped off, lying in a splintered heap on the lawn. The bathroom fixtures, original porcelain I had carefully preserved, were smashed into a dumpster. "He wanted it gutted," Mark explained, pointing to a photo of bare studs. "Said he wanted an open concept." I told him the load-bearing wall was tricky. Rage flared hot in my chest, but I forced it down. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the file I had retrieved from my safe at dawn. "Mark, look at this." I placed the deed on top of his photos. The county seal was embossed in gold, the date clearly stamped from 5 years ago. "I am the sole owner of 840 7 Seabreeze Lane. Ethan Collins has never held title. He doesn't even have a key." Mark stared at the document, his mouth slightly open. "But he showed me the permits." Mark stammered, rummaging through his folder again. He produced a crumpled sheet of paper. "Approved last month." I took the document and scanned the permit number. It was the wrong format for our county, missing the zoning prefix entirely. "This is a template," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He downloaded this. "See the pixelation around the seal. He forged a government document to get you to start demolition." Mark's face went from confused to pale. Mark slumped back against the vinyl booth. "He didn't just say he was flipping it," Mark muttered, rubbing his temples. "He told me he was moving in. He signed the work order as a primary residence renovation." I paused. That changed things. "Why would he do that?" Mark looked up, eyes hard. "To bypass the commercial permitting process and capital gains tax. If he lives there for 2 years, the profit is tax-free." He wasn't just flipping it. He was planning to steal it and live in it. The scale of the deception was dizzying. Ethan wasn't just a liar. He was meticulously dismantling my legal ownership to service his own debt. I looked at the pile of evidence between us. Forged permits, unauthorized demolition, and a contract built on air. "He's desperate," I said, gathering the papers. "And desperate men are dangerous." Mark nodded, his anger now replaced by a grim resolve. "So, what do we do?" I closed my briefcase with a snap. We let him keep digging. My home office was silent except for the hum of my hard drive. It was Monday evening, and the shadows were lengthening across the desk like accusatory fingers. I dialed David Chen, my real estate attorney, and put him on speaker. "David, I need you to run a full asset search on Ethan Collins." David hesitated on the other end. "Your brother-in-law. Is this about the beach house rumors?" "It's not rumors," I said, staring at the scanned deed on my screen. "It is criminal fraud. I needed legal armor before I went to war." David's keyboard clacked rhythmically as he accessed the database. "Okay, let's see. Collins Ethan, Riverside County." A pause stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. "Alan, this guy is underwater. Deep." I leaned in, watching the cursor blink. "How bad?" "He has 3 liens against his primary residence," David recited flatly. "And there are 2 civil judgments from credit card companies totaling $48,000. The charismatic investor from the party was actually drowning in unsecured debt." "He's insolvent," I whispered. The puzzle pieces clicked into a jagged picture. Ethan wasn't flipping the beach house for a bonus or a vacation fund. He was trying to outrun a financial avalanche that was about to bury my sister. "There is more," David said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am looking at a credit inquiry from a private lender. High risk, hard money stuff. Ethan was shopping for fast cash, and he was using my property as the bait. Can you see the collateral?" I asked, my hand gripping the edge of the desk. "Pulling it up now," David replied. "It is a home equity line of credit application. Pending approval." I felt a cold sweat prickle my neck. To get a HELOC, you needed to be the owner. He forged a deed transfer. I guessed. Worse. David corrected. He uploaded a power of attorney document. "It says you authorized him to manage the asset." David forwarded the PDF. I opened it, and there was my name, signed in blue ink, at the bottom of a document I had never seen. The signature was a decent copy, likely traced from a birthday card or a check. It granted Ethan full financial control over 840, 7 Seabreeze Lane. "This is a felony," David said quietly. "If that loan funds, he walks away with 200 grand of your equity." The clock was ticking louder now. "Check the disbursement instructions," I told David. "Where is the money supposed to go?" David scrolled down. "Direct wire to a luxury leasing agency in Newport." I closed my eyes. Ethan wasn't just paying off old debts. He was financing a new life, leasing a high-end car, or maybe an apartment. Banking on money he hadn't stolen yet. He had already spent the profit from a house he didn't own. It was pathological. "Freeze it," I commanded. "Send a fraud alert to the lender immediately." David agreed, promising to file the paperwork within the hour. I hung up and sat in the dark. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. If I stopped the loan, the creditors would come for Ethan. If they came for Ethan, they would destroy Lauren's credit and her sanity. I wasn't just stopping a renovation. I was about to detonate my sister's marriage. Wednesday afternoon found me sitting in my car outside the precinct, phone in hand. I needed one final nail for the coffin before I walked through those glass doors. Detective Hayes had asked for direct communication, where Ethan claimed authority. I opened our text thread, which was dormant and mostly filled with birthday wishes from years past. I typed carefully, keeping my tone casual but specific. "Hey Ethan, did the county require structural permits for the load-bearing posts?" I hit send. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then vanished. He was typing, then deleting. I watched the screen, imagining him scrambling to come up with a plausible lie. He had to sound knowledgeable without admitting he hadn't actually filed anything. If he said yes, he was lying about government documents. If he said no, he was admitting to gross negligence. Finally, the bubble popped up again. "Nah, didn't need them," he wrote. "It's cosmetic only." I handled the inspector personally. He had just claimed to handle an inspector that didn't exist. I took a screenshot immediately. I needed it to go further. "That's great," I replied, feigning ignorance. "I know the Coastal Commission can be a nightmare with setbacks." "Did you have to file a variance for the railing height?" I knew for a fact the railing height was standard, but a variance would require a public hearing. If he claimed he did it, he was fabricating a public event. "Yeah, totally," Ethan fired back, faster this time. "Had a hearing last Tuesday. They love what we're doing with the place." I stared at the text. He was constructing an alternate reality, where he was a local hero rather than a thief. I forwarded the screenshot to Detective Hayes. Secure email. This was evidence of intent. He wasn't just confused, he was actively deceiving family members to maintain control of the asset. The trap was working. A notification slid down from the top of my screen. It was Hayes. That's enough. We have probable cause for the search warrant based on the loan docs. But this establishes a pattern. I should have stopped there. I had what the law needed. But a dark curiosity took over. I wanted to see how far he would take it. Sounds like you're crushing it, I typed. When can I see the progress? Maybe I can stop by this weekend. Actually, why don't you come by Saturday? Ethan replied. I'm hosting a little walkthrough for some potential investors. You should see the transformation. The audacity took my breath away. He was inviting me, the owner, to an open house for investors he planned to defraud. He was going to sell shares in a property he had already tried to mortgage illegally. He wasn't just desperate, he was delusional. I'll be there, I typed back. I wouldn't miss it. I wouldn't be going on Saturday, though. The police were scheduled to execute the warrant on Friday morning. Ethan thought he was setting the stage for his next big con, inviting me into his web to validate his success. He didn't know he was actually inviting me to witness his funeral. I put the car in gear and looked at the police station entrance. He had set the time, but I was the one who controlled the clock. Thursday morning broke gray and humid, pressing down on the city like a wet wool blanket. I arrived at the Daily Grain, a trendy spot near Lauren's gym that smelled of oat milk and toxic positivity. She walked in 5 minutes late, wearing yoga pants and oversized sunglasses, looking like every other suburban mom who hadn't slept well. She hugged me, breathless and sweaty. So glad you called, she chirped, ordering a smoothie. Ethan said you might invest. That would mean so much to him. Her innocence was a physical weight on my chest. I waited until she sat down before I slid the leather portfolio across the reclaimed wood table. Lauren, we aren't talking about investing today, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. We need to talk about ownership. She frowned, straw halfway to her mouth, confused by my tone. What do you mean? I opened the folder to the first page, the grant deed. I bought the beach house from the estate 5 years ago. Ethan knows this. He has always known this. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. Lauren stared at the document, but her eyes refused to focus on the dense legal text. That's just a draft, she said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. Ethan said the estate transfer was complicated. Something about probate courts and lost files. She pushed the paper back toward me as if it were contaminated. He's been working so hard, Alan. He's stressed about the timeline. Don't add to it. She was reciting a script he had written for her. It was painful to watch her defend the man dismantling her life. I didn't argue. I simply turned the page to the printed text logs from Mark Rivera. These are from the contractor, I said gently. Ethan hired him to gut a house he doesn't own, and he hasn't paid him a dime. Lauren read the messages, her face paling as she saw the timestamps. He told me the contractor was difficult. She whispered, her voice trembling. He said the guy was trying to extort us. The cognitive dissonance was cracking. The hero in her head was colliding with the con artist on the page. He isn't being extorted, Lauren. He is broke. I laid out the credit report David had pulled. The numbers were stark black ink on white paper. 48,000 in credit card debt. 3 liens. He's been funding your lifestyle with high-interest credit. And now the walls are closing in. She picked up the sheet, her hands shaking so hard the paper rattled against the table surface. No, she breathed. We have savings. He showed me the accounts last month. We have a college fund for the girls. The accounts are screenshots, Lauren. Photoshop. I delivered the final blow, sliding the loan application forward. He applied for a home equity loan against my house. He forged my signature. She looked at the document, and then her eyes went wide with a specific, horrifying recognition. She touched the bottom of the page, right next to the forged authorization. He brought me papers last week. She stammered, tears spilling over. He said it was for tax purposes. A formality for the business license. The blood drained from her face. I signed it, Alan. Her confession was barely audible over the cafe chatter. I didn't read it. I just signed where he put the little sticky note. She had unknowingly notarized her own destruction. I reached across the table and took her cold hand. Listen to me closely, I said, locking eyes with her. The police are raiding your house tomorrow morning. You need to take the kids and go to Mom's tonight. She didn't argue this time. She just looked at me, and the sister who beamed at parties was gone. Friday morning arrived with a stillness that felt deceptively peaceful. I parked West Sedan 3 houses down from Ethan and Lauren's manicured lawn, the engine ticking as it cooled. The suburban street was silent, the kind of quiet that usually implies safety, but I knew better today. Detective Hayes had texted me at 6:55 a.m. Green light. We're moving in. I wasn't required to be here, but I couldn't look away. I checked my watch. 7 a.m. A black SUV turned the corner, followed silently by 2 cruisers with their lights off. The show was about to start. The officers moved with practiced efficiency, their dark uniforms stark against the beige stucco. Detective Hayes walked up the driveway, flanking the front door with 2 uniformed officers. She didn't pound on the wood. She rang the doorbell. A civilized start to a barbaric end. I rolled my window down, straining to hear. A muffled shout came from inside, likely Ethan yelling at a delivery driver. He opened the door, coffee mug in hand, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my car. His arrogance died instantly as Hayes held up the warrant. From my vantage point, I saw Ethan's posture shift from confusion to his signature aggressive charm. He pointed a finger at Hayes, likely threatening to call the mayor. Hayes didn't flinch. She simply stepped forward, forcing him to retreat into his own foyer. The other officers filed in behind her, carrying evidence boxes that were currently empty, but wouldn't be for long. A neighbor across the street stopped walking her retriever, staring open-mouthed. The facade of the perfect family man was crumbling on the front porch for the entire neighborhood to witness. Minutes stretched into an hour as I sat in the humid car. I imagined them sweeping the home office, finding the printer used for the permits and the laptop containing the forged templates. Lauren had taken the girls to our mother's house the night before, leaving the house eerily void of innocent clutter. Eventually, the front door opened again. An officer emerged carrying a tower of hard drives and a heavy file box. Ethan followed them out, but he wasn't in handcuffs yet. He was pacing the driveway, frantically typing on his phone. My own phone buzzed on the passenger seat, vibrating violently against the leather. The caller ID flashed. Ethan. I stared at it for 3 rings, letting the dread build, before I swiped answer. Alan? He screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. You need to get down here. There is a huge misunderstanding with the police. I didn't answer immediately. I watched him through the windshield, pacing in circles like a trapped animal. It's not a misunderstanding, Ethan, I said calmly. It's a search warrant. I know because I gave them the evidence. There was a stunned silence on the line, followed by a feral snarl. You did this? I am your family. He spun around, looking at the street, but he didn't see me parked in the shadows. I was doing this for us. For the family legacy. You were stealing my equity to pay your debts. I countered, my voice cold. And you made Lauren an accomplice. He laughed then, a sharp manic sound. Lauren. She knew. She signed the papers, Alan. If I go down, she goes down with me. Remember that. Lauren is a witness, Ethan. Not a co-conspirator. The police know you tricked her. Before he could respond, Detective Hayes stepped back out onto the driveway. She signaled to the uniformed officer. I saw Ethan drop the phone as they grabbed his wrists. He struggled briefly, a pathetic flailing of limbs, before they spun him around and cuffed him. The phone lay on the concrete, still connected. I could hear the scuffle through the speaker, the metallic click of handcuffs, and Ethan shouting about his rights. It sounded like justice. They walked him to the cruiser, his silk robe flapping open to reveal boxer shorts and pale legs. It was a humiliating end to the image he had carefully cultivated for years. The neighbor with the dog had been joined by a jogger, both of them filming with their phones. This wouldn't just be a legal defeat. It would be social annihilation. Detective Hayes picked up Ethan's dropped phone and spoke into it. Mr. Morrison, we secured the laptop. The template files were open on the desktop. It's over. I hung up and started my engine, slowly pulling up to the curb as they shoved Ethan into the back of the cruiser. He saw me then, his face pressed against the glass, distorted and red with fury. He mouthed something that looked like a threat, but he looked small and powerless. I rolled down my window as Hayes approached. He tried to blame the contractor. She said, shaking her head. Said Mark Rivera masterminded the whole thing. I handed her the flash drive with Mark's texts. Mark is ready to testify. The cruiser pulled away, lights flashing now to clear the intersection, taking the chaos with it. I stood on the sidewalk next to the officer, securing the front door with yellow tape. The house looked different now. Not like a home, but like a crime scene. Lauren's flower baskets were wilting on the porch, neglected in the chaos of the last week. I looked at the empty driveway where the BMW usually sat. The silence that followed his arrest wasn't empty. It was the sign of the truth, finally taking up space. The fluorescent lights of the county courthouse hummed with a frequency that matched my anxiety. 3 months had passed since the raid, stripping away the summer heat and Ethan's arrogance. When the bailiff let him in, the change was physical. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a generic orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He looked smaller, gray-skinned and hollow, avoiding eye contact with the gallery where his parents sat weeping. I sat in the back row, a silent observer to the dismantling of a narcissist. He didn't look like a wolf anymore. He looked like a cornered rat. The proceedings were surgically precise, lacking the drama of television, but carrying twice the weight. Ethan's public defender murmured to him, a sharp contrast to the high-powered legal team Ethan had promised everyone he would hire. He couldn't afford them. Guilty, Ethan whispered, his voice cracking on the single syllable. The judge, a stern woman with zero patience for white-collar theft, adjusted her glasses. She read the charges aloud: forgery, grand theft, wire fraud. Each count was a hammer blow. He wasn't fighting it. He was just trying to survive the impact of his own ambition. Mr. Collins, the judge said, leaning over the bench with a gaze that could cut glass. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, predatory scheme targeting your own family. She highlighted the forged permits and the home equity application, dissecting his character in public record. Ethan shrank into his seat, his shoulders hunching defensively. The sentence was handed down 3 years in minimum security, followed by strict probation and restitution. It was lenient compared to the maximum, but for a man whose currency was reputation, it was a death sentence. We spilled out onto the courthouse steps, blinking against the harsh afternoon sun. The air tasted like car exhaust and freedom. Lauren was waiting by the railing, wearing a simple blazer and jeans, looking tired but surprisingly steady. She hadn't gone inside. "Is it over?" she asked, shielding her eyes. 3 years, I said. She nodded slowly, absorbing the number without tears. The divorce papers had been filed weeks ago, severing her legal ties to his debt. She wasn't mourning the husband she lost. She was mourning the years she had wasted believing in a mirage. That evening, the atmosphere in my parents' dining room was unrecognizable. For years, these dinners had been filled with Ethan's booming voice and tall tales of conquest. Now, the silence is heavy, punctuated only by the scrape of silverware. My mother looked older, her movements brittle as she served the roast chicken. My father poured the wine with a shaking hand, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. The empty chair at the head of the table screamed of his absence. The king was dead, and his court was trying to remember how to function. Dad cleared his throat, a rough sound that made Mom jump. He put his fork down and looked directly at me, something he hadn't done with intent in a decade. "Alan," he started, his voice thick with regret. "I need to say something." He took a breath, struggling with the words. I was impressed by the noise he made. I mistook his volume for competence. He gestured vaguely around the room. "And I mistook your silence for weakness." I was wrong. It was a clumsy apology, but it was the first honest thing he'd said since college. I took a sip of wine, letting the apology settle in the air between us. "He was good at what he did, Dad," I said quietly. "He made people want to believe him." My father nodded, shame coloring his cheeks. "You bought that house 5 years ago," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "And you kept it running. You protected your sister." He looked at me with a new expression. Respect. It felt strange, like wearing a coat that finally fit after years of being told I was the wrong size. I had finally become visible. Lauren reached for the water pitcher, her hand steady. "I kept the job," she announced suddenly, breaking the somber mood. "Ethan wanted me to quit, remember? Said it looked bad for his image if I worked." She smiled, a small, fierce thing. "My salary covers the rent on the new apartment. And with the debt legally assigned to him, I am going to be okay." We all looked at her. We had treated her like a victim, but she had been quietly building her own lifebelt while the ship sank. She wasn't helpless, she had just been overshadowed. The dinner continued, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The artificial hierarchy Ethan had enforced was gone, replaced by a fragile but genuine connection. We talked about real things. Lauren's work, my law practice, the actual maintenance needs of the beach house. There was no champagne, no toasts to imaginary millions, and no performances. As I watched my family eat, I realized we were finally whole again. We didn't toast with champagne this time. We drank coffee, and for the first time, they actually listened when I spoke. The salt air tasted different now that the chaos had settled. I stood on the newly finished deck, running my hand along the smooth railing. Mark Rivera had done incredible work once the forged permits were replaced and the checks actually cleared. The cheap, flashy materials Ethan had ordered were gone, replaced by weather-resistant teak and marine-grade steel. It wasn't the clip-flip transformation Ethan had bragged about. It was solid, built to last another generation. I leaned against the wood, feeling the house breathe. The sliding glass door opened, and the sound of laughter spilled out. Lauren walked onto the deck carrying a tray of lemonade, looking lighter than she had in years. The strain around her eyes had softened into calm resilience. "Girls are fighting over the top bunk," she said, setting the tray down on the table. "I told them they have all summer to switch." She wasn't wearing the designer clothes Ethan used to demand. She was barefoot, wearing denim shorts, finally comfortable in her own skin. I watched my nieces run down the stairs to the sand, their shrieks piercing the rhythmic crash of the waves. Ethan had looked at this view and seen dollar signs, a way to leverage debt into social capital. I saw it for what it was, a legacy to be protected. "Thank you for letting us come," Lauren said, joining me at the railing. I didn't think I'd ever step foot here again. "It's a different house now," I replied. We scrubbed the lies out of the walls. A splash of orange caught my eye in the neighbor's yard. It was a "for sale" sign, freshly planted in the dune grass. The neighbor was a speculator, always chasing the market highs, loud about his profits and silent about his losses. It was a reminder that the world was full of Ethans, men who treated homes like poker chips. I sipped my lemonade, watching the sign flutter in the breeze. Let them sell. Let them chase the noise. I wasn't going anywhere. Lauren followed my gaze to the sign and frowned. "Ethan would have tried to buy that, too," she murmured. "With money he didn't have." She turned to face the ocean, the wind catching her hair. "I used to think his confidence was safety. I didn't realize safety is actually boring. It's paying bills on time and checking permits." She looked at me, her expression serious. "You made safety look invisible, Alan." "Sorry I didn't see it. Invisibility has its perks," I said. "You hear more." The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the water in streaks of violet and gold. It was the same view Ethan had tried to sell, but he was sitting in a cell staring at concrete. I took a deep breath, savoring the peace that came from owning the truth. The house stood solid behind me, no longer a stage for someone else's performance. The sun went down over the water, and the only sound was the ocean, loud, constant, and real.